Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Autism Demystified. My name is Dr. Vladimir Barayev. I am a general pediatrician specializing in autism care for children, and today we have a very special guest who is joining us on the show. Her name is Barbara Diamora. She is a special education teacher and an autism mom who has spent over 20 years supporting families with children on the autism spectrum. She has taken her own life's personal challenges in raising her son, Nicholas the Changer, who we unfortunately lost in 2023, and turned his message into an empowerment, literally allowing those who cannot speak a chance to communicate. She's always fought for nonverbal individuals to have acceptance on the quality of their thoughts and not on the quality of their speech. Barbara, welcome.
Thank you, Vlad. Thank you very much.
So can you please share a little bit more with us about your experiences and your professional endeavors and all of the work that you have done as a CE teacher and a special education teacher with our audience?
Sure. Yes. I am a special education teacher for 34 years. I am currently a CE teacher, which is a special education itinerant teacher. I go into the preschools with children with and without a diagnosis at that young age, who are try to be ready to be mainstreamed. And I am there to help them achieve success, to help work with the staff and the teacher to make sure that they have the proper supports. I've been doing that for a very long time. I am also a founding member of the Grace Foundation of New York, which is 25 years old this year. I started that back in the year 2000 with some other parents who wanted to make a difference, and we have grown exponentially. We service hundreds of children. We have phenomenal programs. We are going to be having culinary kitchens and hopefully a food truck really soon. So there's some really exciting things happening there. I am also a founding family. My son Nicholas, along with 3 of his friends, founded Crimson Rise, which is a nonprofit here on Staten Island servicing the non-speaking autistic community who spell to communicate.
This is incredible. You do so very much. I don't know how you have time to sleep, Barbara. You do so much work, all out of the goodness of your heart.
Well, after losing Nicholas, I had to make it my mission that I was going to finish the work we were doing together because it was that important. So it's what gets me out of bed in the morning, and it's really something that I'm passionate about because I know he would want me to finish what he started.
Absolutely. And let's get right to work then. So for the children that you are seeing and assessing that are being ready to be mainstreamed, I'm assuming that those children are verbal for the most part.
Yes. They're not all as verbal as you think. Like, they might have some language, but they're not using it effectively to communicate properly. There's different types of speech. There's request language, there's echolalia, and then there's, regular speech patterns. So most of them have regular speech patterns that come my way, but I've had my share of children who have very limited speech.
And what is exactly the specific, most commonly given recommendation that you have that you feel is lacking for these children? Like, what kind of things do you see that could be much improved? That there's a great opportunity to see a lot of progress for their education.
Okay, well, one of the first things that I tell parents, and this is something I did with Nicholas, and everyone used to say to me, how was he able to do that? And how did you get him to do this? And honestly, I labeled my home like a preschool classroom. I put words everywhere. I labeled the refrigerator with a big sticker that said refrigerator, chair, table, everything I could label, I labeled. My family used to tease me and say if they stood still long enough, they'd get a label on it. and that was the truth. So it was a whole language approach. And it was that he saw the written word on things, and I labeled everything like a preschool classroom. Doors, you name it. Drawers in the house. His dresser had pictures of underwear with the word underwear, socks with the word socks, just everything that had a place. I didn't label each toy, but I labeled the toy box, and certain things that I could label, I did. And another piece of advice is I tell everyone, if your child is watching TV and videos, they should be educational, and they should be always on closed caption. They should see the written words when they hear speech, no matter what they're watching. It's so important because they really do learn to read a whole language approach and understand the written words more than you'll ever know. And this came straight from my son, Nicholas, because we asked him at, I think he was 11, when I took him to Texas to learn the rapid prompting method. How did you learn to read? How do you know all these words? And he said, Mom, I've been listening all these years and seeing. So it's really, really an what's the word?
Underappreciated?
Yes, piece of advice that really needs to get out there, because it really can change a lot of things. The other piece of advice is that I tell everyone is you need to assume that they are understanding every single thing you say about them, to them, even the gossip you're doing on the telephone. They are listening. They are aware, even though they don't appear to be. You need to trust me on this, because this again came from my son. He used to say to me, I hated when people talked about me like I wasn't there. And you know what? We are all guilty of that, whether we're talking about them for their education, the plans, where we're going to go to dinner, what their birthday party is going to be, you name it. They are aware of everything you're saying, even though they may appear disconnected. So you have to be mindful of that at all times.
Absolutely. So taking a full language immersion approach to kids, not just having them activate one sense when they're learning a language, but so not only hearing a word, also seeing the word spelled out in front of them. And sometimes even taking a letter block, they could feel the texture of a letter as well.
Multi-sensory, multi-sensory, writing in sand, touching letters, all the things that I do as a teacher. These are the things that I do with the young kids, to immerse them in letters and language, and their, spelling their name, and identifying people in their environment, all those things. Another thing that people don't maybe appreciate very much is that these kids are so bright, so there. And people tend to think they're not, so they lower the bar and they keep the bar low. That is the biggest mistake you can ever make. You need to raise that bar, and they will meet you there. You have to trust me on this as well. If you teach them down here, they stay down here. If your child is still matching as a teenager and sorting, you are in trouble. I'm sorry to say it so bluntly. They should not be doing those skills at that age. You should be immersing them in education that is meaningful, that is age appropriate. And I'm not saying, you're going to sit there and teach them, the history of Antarctica. I'm really not saying that either. I'm just saying you need to give them the dignity and respect and presume competence. And by doing that, you give them age appropriate information, education, exposure on TV. And that is not to say that they don't love their young, I call them, the young baby videos, that gives them pleasure because that my son told me was familiar. It was very routine, like they knew what was coming. There was no surprises. It actually lowered their anxiety. So I'm not saying that they can't do that and watch that, but it should not be all they're watching and doing.
I find it fascinating that looking at neurotypical educators and families and parents trying to communicate with a child on the spectrum, it's that we have a limited view of what intelligence looks like because there are so many different forms of it. And we have to keep our minds open to the many ways that a child can show us all of their wonderful ideas and dreams and understanding of things that may not appear to us the way we expect it to appear because what we're used to seeing ourselves. We ourselves are kind of stuck in that kind of routine of like, oh, it should look this way. No, in reality, you have to keep your mind open to seeing that great ideas and great intelligence can show itself in many different forms.
Oh boy, absolutely. And thank God you get that, Dr. Vlad, because so many people don't. And many parents don't. They really think, I've met parents and they say, oh, my child's on a 2-year-old level. They can't do that. Oh, no, your child is not on a 2-year-old level and your child can do that. So number one, you need to stop saying that, especially in front of them, if that's what you're doing. And number two is you have to raise that bar and presume competence and your child will meet you there. So it's almost like if you never fill the pot, it's never going to have anything in it. You understand what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like if you don't expect them to do much, you never challenge them to do much, they'll never have the opportunity to learn how to do much.
100%. And that is something that I speak about in the community. I've given many talks, and that is something I speak about. I also speak about something that's a touchy subject with parents, and that is giving them everything they want to keep them quiet or to keep them busy or to keep them happy. That is probably the second biggest mistake you will ever make in your life. Because when you have a teenager, then you have someone who is tantruming, who only wants their way, who is rigid, who has what may appear as like OCD, things have to be that way, or there's a severe meltdown, tantrums. So I hate to say it bluntly, but they created that by trying to appease the child, never putting parameters, rules, expecting them to follow the rules, expecting them to do things not the way they want to every moment, those things, and feeding them, just giving them stuff to eat or handing them the iPad. Worst mistakes you could ever make, because you're going to have an overweight, unhealthy child, number one, who has other, comorbid conditions besides autism. They could be pre-diabetic, diabetic, who knows. They also have maladaptive behaviors because they were not taken maybe somewhere or shown that this is how we behave when we're not in the home. I hear it all the time. My child won't leave his clothes on. I can't take him out. Well, you let your child take their clothes off all the time and didn't teach them maybe a way to keep their clothes on, reward them for keeping their clothes on. There's all things that we can do to stop maladaptive behaviors. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's definitely not easy. That's a lot of work. And I'm not beating up on parents that are letting their kids take their clothes off. So please don't get that impression. I'm just trying to say, if you let those behaviors exist and never try to correct them, it's going to be a mess when they're older.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that it's rough on parents, especially. And this is another thing I want to talk to you about, like your personal experience. It's rough on parents, especially when their child first receives the diagnosis, that the parents have to cope with their initial emotions and how they want to go forward with raising that child, and the professionals that they're going to turn to help them make the behavioral adjustments that their child needs. that some kids truly do have autism is a spectrum. So there are some kids whose behavior can be redirected with a certain amount of energy, and other kids need far greater amounts of energy and persistence and time to redirect their behaviors, which at that point you're going to seek professional help at doing it as a parent on your own. Just with it's much easier said than done at that point.
Oh yeah, it could feel like it's going to kill you.
Yeah,
it really can wear you down and break you. And quite frankly, some parents don't come back from that. They just stay very broken, very stuck, very depressed, very isolated. And that I hope changes, because I feel like, at least what I did, again, I can only draw on my own personal story. I went to every seminar, everything I could. And there wasn't even things available online the way they are today. I literally went to a conference, paid the money, sat there, listened, took notes, took the handout, wrote things down, asked questions. But I read a lot of books. I went to a lot of courses and different seminars. I sought professional help as much as I could. I just really, really educated myself. And my husband and I joke that we say that one of the greatest success stories we ever had was toilet training Nicholas. That was hard. That was really hard. So, and that took years. When I say years, there was plenty of successes, but there was plenty of accidents as well, too. So that took a long time, but we did it. And I want to say this: if you don't toilet train your child, you will be subjecting yourself and your child to a life of isolation, because there are no programs that are taking 8, 10, 12, 15-year-olds in diapers. It's not available. So toilet training, I cannot emphasize enough how important that is, to stick with it and get that done, because it will limit their possibilities in the future.
Mm-hmm. A lot of this stuff may sound like tough love, but when you're down the road and you're having all of these challenges that you could look back on and say, I wish I would have done something earlier to help my child reach a different trajectory today, you're going to look back and listen to Barbara's words and say, wow, she's 100% right. Like that should have been diligent and persistent in insisting on my child having some independent skills, that they're not fully dependent on every single thing that they need, that they can develop some semblance of confidence and self-efficacy in small forms. It doesn't have to be for everything, but in some small form, that to let it build on itself.
Right.
Can you share with us some areas where you were trying some approaches and strategies, but if the version of Barbara today could go back in time and speak to the version of Barbara early on, what advice would you give that early Barbara from the challenges that she was having at that time?
Well, one of the things I probably would have done is not beat up on my husband, not physically, but as much as I did, because he was really tough on Nicholas. And I used to get very angry with him and say, stop looking at him like that. You're scaring him, or don't say that in that tone. Or, I remember an incident. Nicholas was leaving his bed and wanting to walk around the whole house. And my husband put up a gate, and I felt like he was locking him in the room. I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know if that's right or fair or humane. I was like very troubled over it. And my husband said, he's going to learn to stay in that bed and not walk around in the middle of the night. So he put the gate up, and I remember him sleeping right outside the gate. And every time Nicholas got up and came to the gate, first we started with, get back in your bed. It's time for bed. We're not walking around. And when that didn't work, Billy got in the bed, in the room, and laid on the floor by the gate.
Camping out.
Every time he got up, Billy put him back in the bed and said, no, you are staying in your bed. And this went on for a long time. But guess what? Nicholas stayed in his bed, and he never walked the floors, and he never got out. Even once he was older and the gate was up, he was not a wanderer or a fleer. He stayed in his room. We did reinforce him for staying in his bed. He got a kiss or a tickle or this or that, saying, oh, good, you're in your bed, you're in your bed. So we did a lot of behavior modifications with things like that. But that's one of the things I regret, is giving my husband a very hard time about the different parenting styles that we had. I didn't like, if Nicholas had fear, I would always feel bad. Like I would feel like, oh, he's afraid of getting that look from my husband, or he's afraid of maybe getting, scolded for doing something. But you know something, it was the best thing we ever did, because we did it with our other children, and Nicholas learned the same exact way they did. We didn't treat them, well, at least Billy didn't. I did to a degree, because I was a special education teacher. My approach was a little bit more, different from that education standpoint and behavioral standpoint. I used a lot of behavior modification, a lot of positive reinforcement, a lot of rewarding to get him to do something or stop doing something, extinction programs and stuff like that. But my husband was onto something. He was very much a believer, and he's going to learn the same way the other two are going to learn. He's not allowed to do that. So they're not allowed to do that. He's not going to be allowed to do that. So I probably would go back and tell myself to not be so hard. It probably would have saved a lot of arguments.
Also taking us back in time, one pattern that I've seen a lot of families share with me is that there's an initial period where they don't truly accept the autism diagnosis for their child. They are looking for, understandably, any way, any means of either quote unquote curing them, or believing that they'll grow out of it, and not addressing the situation head on and accepting and embracing it, and helping their child thrive for who they really are, rather than who parents believed they were to be. Can you take us through your journey? How did that play out for you?
Wow. Well, I was right where you just said. When Nicholas first got diagnosed, Dr. Schwartzberg told us to stay off the internet. I went right home and went on the internet. He gave me a diagnosis of PDD-NOS. I didn't even know what that meant.
Was this in the 90s?
This was in the 90s, 1998. PDD-NOS, and everything I looked up on the internet took me to the word autism. Mm-hmm. I felt like someone just punched me in the stomach and took the life out of us. I remember crying over his crib that night. We were looking at him. Actually, it was like a death, like a mourning, like everything we thought was going to be wasn't going to be. Every hope and dream that we had felt like it left us. It was just a terrible time. I remember going through years of not, when I say years, maybe just a year or two, not even wanting to say the word autism. Mm-hmm. I used to say, oh, he has PDD-NOS. People would be like, what is that? Anything not to say that A word. I was just horrified with that A word. It was like a life sentence, and I was so frightened. But I did pick myself up, dust myself off, educate myself, and years went by of trying to fix it. Every therapy, every kind of crazy thing, we injected him with secretin. Do you remember that, Vlad? Mm-hmm. Methyl B12. I did the DAN, the protocol. We put him on a gluten-free, casein-free diet. I didn't see much of a difference, so I never really stuck with that. That's something maybe I should have tried harder at, but it was just so hard because he ate like 4 or 5 things. So, and they were all gluten. So It was just almost next to impossible to do that. It was just, those were very weary years, the toilet training, the smearing of feces, just crazy things we lived with. And then, going to a birthday party and seeing how everyone else's child was behaving. It was just a terrible couple of years. Those first years really were very, very rough. I did seek counseling. I recommend that. And the sooner you can accept the diagnosis, the better, because what happened to me, the seismic shift that happened to me is I was, and I tell this story in public a lot. I was in the shower. I was pregnant with um, my second son, my middle child, Christian. And I just cried out to God saying, how am I going to do this? I don't know what I'm doing. I was afraid of having another autistic child. I was full of despair. And I said, please, God, please, I'm going to stop trying to fix him and cure him. Just show me the way. Show me the way. And I really felt like something switch went off in me. I stopped trying to chase every fix, every cure, every therapy. And I just let Nicholas be Nicholas. And I accepted him for who he was. And I built upon his strengths and all the things that he was able to do. I taught him like I taught my other kids. He learned to do chores. He was great at putting on a wash, and independently too, by the way. Not at that little young age, but grew to be independent and doing a lot of chores. He learned how to empty the dishwasher, load the dishwasher, sort the dishwasher, fold clothes. I got that board and showed him how to fold his clothes and put them away. He learned to cook. He loved to cook. That was something he was so passionate about. So once I accepted it and I accepted him for who he was, I saw his whole brightness and light. Like, okay, they get me. They're not trying to fix me. They don't think something's wrong with me. I cannot express that enough, how big that was in our lives, how important it was. It gave Nick such dignity and respect that we accepted him for who he was. And I remember asking him once he was a full-blown communicator on the board, how does it feel to be autistic? Are you mad? Are you unhappy? And he said, Mom, it's who I am, and it's okay. And I know that God made me like this for a reason. So we ran with that. We were like ambassadors. We were telling people, anyone who would listen, that it's okay. You're different, but you're okay. You're going to be okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the more we learn about autism and the full degrees of the spectrum and just how it has interwoven itself into all humankind, all human history, and the same traits that can cause a child to have difficulty communicating verbally are the same genetic traits that can lead a child to grow up and have so much focus that they can discover the concept of E=mc². It's all the autism spectrum. It's a part of the beauty of human diversity. It's not some other species that's not related to who we are. We're all the same species. We just have a diversity of viewpoints of accepting information from the world through our senses and the way we perceive it. And thank you so much for sharing that story, Barbara. I got goosebumps listening to you. I'm gonna start crying. That was amazing. You mentioned two very important things that I don't want to skip over. Number one is for parents who may feel like they need some counseling. What advice would you give? At what point should they seek it? And how can, even if you were to give advice to myself, I give autism diagnoses to young families all the time. What would you love to have seen from like Dr. Schwartzberg at the time to give you some guidance early on, or the way he presented the information to you early on? Or is there anything that he could have done wouldn't have made a difference? Or would it have just been to be a friendly ear to listen to, or to tell you that he's available for you? What would you have loved to see, and the counseling that supported you?
Yeah, well, let me say this. Those early years were very rough with pediatricians. I went through about 4 till I found the most wonderful pediatrician, Dr. Ronald Kipp, who is now retired, unfortunately, but he got Nick, he got me. He knew what I was about. He never forced me on a strict vaccine schedule when I wanted to slow things down and do things one at a time and not insult their system. Because I'm not anti-vaccine. I just wasn't pro multiple vaccines.
At that time also was a very scary time, even for professionals, because we had some what seemed like credible information in the late 90s, early 2000s, and there wasn't this robust millions of additional data points that came out in the preceding 25 years. So it was a very confusing time for a lot of people.
Yes, it was. So he respected me, but there was a lot of dismissiveness with other doctors that he would grow out of it, or that he was going to be okay, or that, you know, I remember asking, should I be getting speech therapy yet? And he said, no, he's a boy. They talk late. You got to, you know, relax. And I you know, they viewed me as over anxious or very, maybe being unnecessarily worried for things, but it all was true. Those were things I should have worried about. The therapies were things I should have been on and got early, and I did. I cannot underestimate the importance of occupational therapy, the right occupational therapy. I don't mean just bouncing on a ball, something that addresses the whole sensory system and lets these kids learn how to improve how they interpret the world. It is so very important. Speech therapy, so very important. Physical therapy, so very important. These therapies should be, you know, the cornerstone when someone gets an autism diagnosis. These are the therapies that you really have to do. And if your insurance will pay for them, get in addition to what school gives, because school doesn't always meet the needs of the kind of therapy that they need. The kind of occupational therapy should really be sensory based.
How about things like floor time and ABA therapies?
Yeah, there's a place for all of that. There definitely is a place for all of that. ABA was something we used early on. I kind of wish we would have gotten away from it sooner than we did, because it built up a very big prompt dependence with Nicholas, and that was very, very hard to break. Although we did eventually break it, it took years. Like, there were times he wouldn't take a chip from a bag unless you prompted him that it was okay to do so. As he got older, believe me, he learned, I want the chips, I'm getting the chips. And we were like, fine, you're an adult, you want the chips, get the chips, you know? So there was things that I wish we got away from ABA a little bit earlier than we did, to just work on, you know, to not have so much prompt dependence, because that does create some prompt dependence. Floor time, I love any kind of interaction that you could get down on that floor with your kid. All the things that Nicholas watched were like baby Einstein things and important, vocabulary and enriching things about nature and the world. All those things are so very important, that they see those things and not just watch repetitive videos. Like I said, there's a place for that as well. And that can even be used as a reinforcer. You do this, you're going to get your Elmo video, or you do this, you're going to, get your Sesame Street, or your, at the time it was Teletubbies for Nicholas back in the 90s, the late 90s. I do agree that there's a place for all types of therapies. You just have to find what works for your child. Seeking counseling, Vlad, is something that is so important, especially for a marriage, because I'm going to tell you, the divorce rate is so high with special needs.
50% of all marriages end up in divorce in this country. And if you have a child with special needs, like 80%.
Yep, it's ridiculously high. The parenting styles are different. Like I said, I witnessed that firsthand myself. But my husband and I were committed to staying in this together. It wasn't something either of us ever wanted to leave with the burden of one parent doing this. Your child needs both parents, needs a mom and a dad. And sometimes if there's not a dad, present in the picture, that child's not ruined. I'm just saying it's so much better if you can have an intact family. But seek the counseling. We relied on getting all of the services that were out there so that we could have help in our home with Nicholas. And that involved ComHab, community habilitation, I should say, ComHab services, respite services, where people would come in the home. My husband and I got to go out to dinner or go to a party. A lot of times I took my respite staff with me on a vacation so that we could go with our family and not always maybe have to leave if Nicholas wasn't having something very well or dealing with it. So we always had help. I cannot express enough how important it is to have support, whether that be from your family or for services offered through OPWDD. Get everything you're entitled to. Later on, I even got home care services, and that was someone who came in and did chores with Nicholas and did his laundry and did cooking with him and did things like, helping him navigate his day, his daily adaptive living skills. So I really think parents need to tap into all of those services because it helps you. It helps you and takes that constant 24/7 burden off of you. There's someone there. It's a village, but it's important.
So all those families that have gone on vacations in the past and had to spend the whole time in the hotel room because their child couldn't tolerate being out and enjoying all the sights and sounds. This is not a permanent state. You can get help. You don't have to go on vacations like this. You deserve a vacation too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's really important to pay attention to that and not become so isolated where, you're neglecting the rest of your family because of your disabled child. That happens a lot.
Absolutely. So thank you. I thank you so much for sharing that story because it's, I think it'll open a lot of people's eyes to hear that because there's so many who are going through it right now and not realizing that this is not the way that it has to be. There are ways to have a strong family unit and not devote all the family's time, attention, and resources to one member at the detriment of everyone else.
Yeah, it's big. It's hard, but it's big.
Absolutely. That's it's not as, yeah, like you said, it's hard. It's definitely not something that's easy to do. I really want to touch upon something that can be confusing for a lot of families. It was even confusing for me initially when I heard about it. And I would love to hear your explanation of it. How is it that a typical AAC device is different from a spelling to communicate board or using any kind of spelling to communicate approaches for a child to communicate? Please share that with us.
Yeah, sure. Well, let me start by saying Nicholas was an avid AAC user. I cannot stress how important those early years were of PECs, of the picture exchange system. I labeled everything in the house. A lot of them were words and the PECs picture. We had one outside the bathroom door and he would take it off. If he had to go to the bathroom, I took it off. I put it in my hand. Oh, you have to use the bathroom. We taught him to communicate very early on through the picture exchange communication system. And then he did get an AAC device, which had the different cells. It was very early on, just some cells that when you pressed it said, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty. I became an advocate, wonderful for AAC, and learned that parents who are given an AAC device are entitled to, and listen to me carefully, training on that device. Parents don't know that they can get trained on how to use and program that device. Now, yes, I was a special ed teacher. Maybe it came a little easier to me because it was something that, I had been exposed to, but parents don't know that they can fight to get training on that device. I got the training. I made the boards. I was the one making different boards. And I actually have a lot of them that I can show people what I did. I made a vacation board. So, because the vocabulary changes when you're on vacation. I made a board when we went out to a restaurant. I made a board just of fast food choices. If he was going to go out with his comhab, where would you like to go eat? And then he would tell us. So I was an avid proponent for AAC, which eventually I think helped him transition right into spelling.
Question: the training comes from the DOE or from a private agency, or how does the training work?
Both. I through an impartial hearing, 1 year I sued for the services and the training, and they gave it to me. They gave it to Nicholas. They trained him on it as well. And the company at the time was Tobii Dynavox. They sent a representative to my home, and they showed me how to do it and program it. And I became, it wasn't so difficult once you learn how to do that. And I remember someone being really rough with me and abrupt and said, how do you think that you're going to keep up with his vocabulary, you're going to be making thousands of boards. And they said, you need a core vocabulary. And I said, okay, you're right. Because I was making different boards for different scenarios. And that's when I got the training, and they showed me like a core page, a core vocabulary. And then we built off of that. So that core vocabulary would take us to, like another page, which took us to a different page. So Nicholas was wonderful at navigating that. Don't underestimate that our kids cannot navigate these electronic devices and get in and out of pages, because that's exactly what he did. But when he was 11, I'll talk about spelling now. I went to a workshop at PS 37, and a woman named Chantal, oh God, Kakil Sierra, I don't know how to exactly pronounce it, wrote a book on puberty and autism. And I was always one step ahead. I was in the puberty talk when Nick was 10. People would laugh at me. I'm like, I just want to be prepared. So I went to the talk, and she was talking about her book, and her son Jeremy was there. He was like 21, and he was walking around the room with an Elmo doll, hitting a cookie tin, some kind of tin, making a lot of noise, and was shaking keys. He was just doing a lot of, stimming. And she said, you're going to hear from my son, Jeremy. And he came up, and he went to the podium, and he was on an AAC device, and it said, hello, my name is Jeremy. I'm 21 and I have autism. And he was spelling on this iPad. I was just floored. And I said, oh my goodness, what is he doing? I remember calling my husband, you have to come here. He was going to be golfing. I said, get here and come and see this. And anyway, I went up to her at the end, and I said, what is he doing? And she said, it's called rapid prompting method. And it was invented by a woman named Soma. Don't ask me to pronounce her last name. It's all consonants. She's a beautiful Indian soul who came to the United States and taught her son Tito how to spell. And she invented this method. And I went to Texas. Chantal told me all about it. I went to Texas. I learned all about it. I took Nicholas to her, and he learned how to do it. I then got trained. I brought it back to Staten Island. Fell flat on my face. No one believed it. No one thought it was real. Nobody thought it was, legitimate. And nobody thought it was their words. And it was just a hard uphill battle. But Nicholas became an ambassador, and he proved everyone wrong. He was doing live Q&A right in front of everyone, answering questions. And it finally took off. And then a woman named Elizabeth Vossler from Growing Kids Therapy in Virginia kind of took off on her own and created Spelling to Communicate, which put a lot of emphasis on training others, because Soma was one person and could not reach the masses as much as we would have loved her to. So I took Nicholas to see Elizabeth, and we took off on Spelling to Communicate. And Nicholas just became kind of famous for it.
So he preferred the Spelling to Communicate over the AAC device.
Yes, and the AAC device, you kind of go back to that, because after you master Spelling to Communicate on a stencil and the letters, pointing to the letters, the end result is going back to that iPad and typing independently on an iPad. That's the end goal, is that.
Got it.
So it's kind of cyclical and maybe seems backwards to some people, but it's there's a whole protocol. It does not involve just sticking a letterboard under someone and saying, spell this for me, spell that. It's very much a hierarchy of things, starting with choices, tearing paper, very sensory. And then they have to point to the choice. Oh, good, spell that. See that word? Spell it. And they're actually copying what they see and learning to spell the word in the choices that they are given. And then that eventually builds to open-ended questions. You do not start with open-ended questions in RPM or in Spelling to Communicate. It is very much a reciprocal training of teaching them how to spell the word of something they chose or something that they see, and then building upon that. It's a very motor based thing because we've learned through our spellers, every one of them that has this global apraxia, I'll call it, not just the apraxia of speech, but being in a very tricky body that does not cooperate, that makes them appear that they are not with us, makes them appear like they are in another world and not attending to what's being told to them or hearing things. We learn that nothing is farther from the truth. Their brain and their body are disconnected, and they want very much to be part of our, I don't want to say the word like part of our world, like they're not. They want very much to participate, but their bodies are preventing them. So we teach them in spelling to communicate, to have very much sensory, motor sensory. We address the motor sensory issues and those, unruly bodies. And that's something that people don't realize. They think it's just sticking a letterboard under someone's face and having them spell. There's so much more of the protocol that comes before that.
Do they have to be like an occupational therapist in order to provide that kind of training for a child, or?
No. Doesn't hurt to be. We have many occupational therapists that are also spelling to communicate practitioners, but that you do not have to be that. No. And a lot of parents get trained. One thing that drives me a little bit crazy is when I see the parents who want to spell with their, who want their child to spell, but then they don't get on the boards with them. They're leaving it just to the practitioner, and they're asking the practitioner questions. Ask my child this, or find out this and find out that. Now, while that does happen, and it is important because the child should become fluent in spelling with a practitioner that they know and trust, and that usually does happen first, and it's usually not the parent, but a good spelling to communicate practitioner will help the parent get on the boards and teach the parent how to get on the boards with their child.
And is this something that families would contact Crimson Rise to get set up for their nonverbal child?
Yes. Unfortunately, it's not covered right now. It's not a covered service by OPWDD. We're in our growing pain stage, the same way ABA was not deemed a therapy that people believed or bought into or accepted for a while. We're in our growing pain stages right now, but we're soaring. I don't know if you're aware of how many spellers there are now out there, how many people have seen on the news a valedictorian for a college who has learned spelling to communicate and gave their valedictorian speech on an iPad or through a letterboard, or has just been doing some amazing things. There are some amazing ambassadors out there for spelling.
I know there are books that have been written by nonverbal young adults with autism too.
Yes, Ito in Autism Land is one of our favorites, and there's so many, too many to name. But Nicholas actually authored a chapter in a book.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yes, it's available on Amazon. Leaders around me.
So currently, no private or Medicaid insurance covers this type of therapy, and through the OPWD self-direction, they can't get this reimbursed.
Not yet. It's not. It's something that, believe me, they're working on. They are working on, because we'd like it to be available to the masses.
Absolutely. And any way that I could help out, I would be, of course, more than happy to advocate for that as well, because definitely want to give a voice to kids in a way, and young adults and adults in a way that lets them express think about all the wonderful things we're missing out on as a human species, because there are such wonderful ideas just locked away and are not able to be expressed by all these individuals living with autism. It kind of breaks my heart, but it also motivates you to want to help them and support them, to let them reach their full potentials as well.
Absolutely. Just presume competence. Believe me, that's just, the most important first step is presume competence.
So we are just at the end of our interview, and there has been absolute gold, diamonds, and platinum shared by Barbara today for all of our listeners. God bless you always, Barbara. Please tell us, how can people find out and learn more about all the wonderful projects that you are working on? Where can they go? What websites? What social media handles? Please share all those resources with us. And I'll also add links, of course, to our show notes at the bottom, everything that Barbara mentions.
Right. Yeah. It's the Grace Foundation of New York, which is www.graceofny.org. They are doing amazing things. And one of the things, the legacy projects they're going to be having soon, it's in the works, is Nikki's Kitchen. And they are going to have a beautiful kitchen, named for Nicholas, amongst other incubator kitchens that people in the community will be able to use, home chefs, caterers, restaurant people. So that is something that is amazing. They're in the process of acquiring a food truck for their participants in their day hab. There's just so many beautiful projects going on. They have an amazing podcast that they do, Dan on the Street. I mean, the Grace Foundation is just growing leaps and bounds. So that's one of the websites. The other one is crimsonrise.org, www.crimsonrise.org. And that is where you can find out about the newly formed, we just purchased a building, and it's going to be the Nicholas Diamora Center. And that will be the center where they will hold their day program, that where spellers go to have their full day program. They're immersed in meaningful education and learning everything about things they're interested in. No one is sorting and matching at that program. I can tell you that. They are doing projects like plastics in the ocean. They made a video documentary about that. They are learning about just age appropriate, wonderful things. So there's going to be a bakery soon. Invictus is moving moving to Staten Island and opening a bakery that's going to be there for the spellers, to spelling community to work in and learn in. So that's wonderful. But I'm really excited about the center. That's going to be at 1313 Clove Road. And it's currently being renovated. So stay tuned for that wonderful ribbon cutting. So
exciting. I'll be there. I'll be there.
Yeah, my boy lives on. As much as I am learning to live with a shattered and broken heart, my boy lives on. And I don't know if you know, Vlad, he was an organ donor. He saved 5 lives. There's 5 people who are living today because of Nicholas, one of them being my cousin Gloria, who has his liver. I pray to God that I get to meet the heart recipient because I want to hear his heart beating.
Wow.
And I work every day really hard to try and continue his legacy. We're having a beautiful event. It's a psychic medium brunch for entertainment purposes. It's going to be at the Vanderbilt on March 8th. And it's going to be from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. to benefit the Nicholas Diamora Center. So I would love if people would come out and buy tickets and support that event. That is kind of on Facebook. It's also, there's an event page on Facebook. They can search a psychic medium brunch. So they can even look on my personal Facebook, Barbara Diamora.
Okay. Barbara, I thank you for sharing all of that with us. Namaste to you. The light within me always sees and appreciates the light within you. Thank you for everything that you do and for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Vlad.
All right. So, families out there, you heard the call to action. Barbara has shared so many wonderful resources for all of the work that she has been doing to carry on Nicholas's legacy. And Nicholas the Changer is a name that I will never forget, never leave our memories and our hearts. Once again, I am Dr. Vlad. For parents in New York State, navigate autism with confidence. You can call our office at 917-819-5056 and empower your child's development with proven strategies and compassionate care. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.